Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Michael Brodkorb. Becky is off for one more episode for her fancy wedding. She will be back on the podcast next week. I'm excited to have our special guest host, Jeff Kolb, back for this episode. They say all politics is local, and in this episode, we really mean it. We're joined by Mayor Tim Sanders of Blaine to talk about local politics and developments in the city of Blaine. Mayor Sanders was elected in 2020 and is serving his first term as mayor of Blaine. Before serving as mayor, Sanders served in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2008 to 2016. Jeff previously served on the Crystal City Council from 2014 to 2018. So get ready for an all-municipal edition of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky as the Honorable Jeff Kolb and Mayor Tim Sanders nerd out on their love of city government by talking about exciting topics such as conditional use permits, quasi-judicial zoning decisions, and the dynamics of serving in city government. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this special show.
All right, as Michael mentioned, we are pleased to be joined today by the mayor of Blaine, Minnesota, Tim Sanders, the Honorable Tim Sanders. Good to have you here today.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys for a little bit.
So,
Thank you for joining us today.
So,
you bet.
Mayor Sanders, or I may call you Tim because as a fellow former municipal elected official, I feel like we're on a first-name basis.
Do I have to call you both honorable then?
Please.
Okay, so
you've always had to do that with me, Michael.
Yes,
I mean, that's
it's always. Please. I don't think I've ever got to call you by your first name. So it's either representative or mayor.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's start today. Tim is good.
Please,
let's do it.
please. So let's start with some basics. You are the mayor of Blaine. Yes. How long have you been the mayor of Blaine?
Was elected in 2020. So what are we in year 3 here?
Okay, so and you're in your first term.
Correct.
Okay, and before that you did have a career in the Minnesota legislature. Yes.
Yes, that's right. I was elected in 2008, and then we call it retiring at the age of 34 in 2016.
Fantastic. All right, so a couple terms in the legislature. I did mention when we were chatting a little bit before the interview started that when I was on the city council in Crystal and you were in the legislature, I actually wrote you a letter in my formal capacity, and I actually found it while we were talking here. So it was in support of House File 2093, which would allow local governments to establish special park fees. That did not pass.
Yes.
So thanks for nothing. I appreciate your lack of support on that.
What year was that?
Let's see. It was 2016.
So wait a second.
Oh,
so
shoot.
Jeff,
so we were in the majority at that point in time. Shoot.
So Council Member Kolb sent a letter. This is for the Oppo file. So Council Member Kolb sent a letter to a Republican legislator asking for the ability to raise park fees?
Yes.
Great. Yes. That's fantastic. I'll note that in my Oppo file, and this interview has already paid off. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, as a quick aside, so here's the deal with the special park fees is that as a city, you can bond, meaning you can borrow money and put that on the ballot and have people vote for it and say that, yes, they want to go ahead and borrow a bunch of money to do a big project, to build a community center or invest in their parks or whatever. But what you can't do is ask them if they want to pay extra in taxes for a project if you're not borrowing money. And so that's where it came from, is we wanted to do a special investment in the parks. But what we wanted to do is ask the residents, do you want to add, a certain amount of money per year to the tax levy that would be dedicated to parks, yes or no? And legally in Minnesota, you're not allowed to do that. And so you can ask residents to spend money if you're borrowing money, but you can't if you're not borrowing money, which is kind of a silly thing. But
you get it, Jeff. You wanted the law changed to raise taxes. It's all clear to the listeners. Keep going. Let's stay focused here. Let's stay focused.
So we're not here to talk about special parks fees, though. So we're here to talk about some. We're here to talk about some development that's going on in the city of Blaine, and specifically I guess I want to hear about what's going on in Blaine kind of overall, but I think a little bit there was, I would call it a minor dust up um, that caught my attention last week around some media coverage around this project that really brought me back to my days on the city council and gave me, I don't want to belittle the term PTSD, but gave me some flashbacks to dealing with people on the city council. So that's why this caught my attention. So, Mayor Tim Sanders, tell us a little bit about the development that's going on in Blaine.
Yeah, thank you. What a great question. Blaine is an amazing city, truly. And I think that when being part of the North Metro, I think the North Metro in general is a little bit of an effort for the rest of the metro area. And so we're working hard trying to size that ship a little bit. But Blaine is now probably eighth or ninth largest city in the Twin City,
Yeah,
actually, in the state of
I drove
Minnesota.
through the
Yeah.
other day. I actually just noted that it's something like 70,000 people are close there, I think. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's
exactly.
not a small city.
No, not at all. We're approaching about 73,000, residents. What makes Blaine super unique is the amount of sports recreation that we have in the community. So whether it be the National Sports Center, which brings roughly 4.5 to 5 million people to the city of Blaine, to the region, to the state of Minnesota every single year for sports. Whether it's the PGA Tour and the 3M Open, whether it's Fogarty Ice Arena, the Four Seasons Curling Club. I mean, we are truly a sports recreation destination. And really, I mean, that comes out to roughly 7 million visitors a year to the city of Blaine, which is staggering. And so we've been doing a really good job the last couple of years, really getting out and kind of telling that story. Because as you know, Jeff, when you're talking with developers and end use operators, right, it is all about what do the demographics say, right? Is my business worth planting in your community? What are the rooftops? What's the affluence? All of that goes into the decision making of do we want to invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into putting amenities into a community. And so Blaine really over time really kind of developed in kind of a patchwork phase and, just kind of be like one development at a time. And I would say where Blaine kind of missed the mark a little bit was there really wasn't a master vision for really how the whole city would develop. And so it kind of developed in chunks and kind of developed really, from the north to the northeast. And so, we've been in a spot where for years now, residents are saying, hey, we love the community. We love all the open spaces. We love the wetlands. We love the parks. We love our neighbors. We don't have the amenities that we feel like we deserve or that we want. And why can't we get, the Trader Joe's or some of those other unique or kind of quality grocers? Why can't we get some of the nicer non-chain restaurants? Why are we lacking some of the upper end retail? And so, when I was running for mayor and came in, I said, hey, we're going to change the philosophy a little bit instead of, just kind of a master zoning of the city and kind of dust your hands clean of it. Let's go out and tell the story of Blaine and let's aggressively pursue what we want. And that's really what we've started to do. And so we've identified, multiple priority economic development areas throughout the city and really kind of designed those to be kind of an ecosystem. The concept of being able to park once and then be able to get to all of the different amenities or shopping needs that you have, whether it's grocer, coffee shops, bar, restaurant, other retail uses. But really kind of creating these ecosystems of amenity driven experiences throughout the city. And we've had tremendous success despite everything that's been happening in the world, the last few years, which is capital is very difficult, labor is very difficult. It's not an easy time right now for businesses to be looking at building, particularly from the ground up. We've done a really good job. And we're really excited about that. We've got a massive renovation and revitalization plan for our Northtown Mall area, which, is a mall that is, I don't even know, 40, 50 years old, that really has not kept up with the times and needs some help, needs some real revitalization brought to that area, that part of the city, to some other areas of the city too, where we still have a lot of dirt left to grow and develop. And so really doing that well, strategic plans, and kind of master design those areas well before you kind of, hand it over to a developer. And then our 105th redevelopment, which is immediately north of the National Sports Center, which is about 60 acres, designed to bring in hotels, restaurants, retail, some high-end apartments as well, and really designed to be an entertainment experience, an entertainment district. First for our residents, but then, as I mentioned in my opening, to really go after all of those sports tourists that come here. The National Sports Center hosts about 54 they would consider major tournaments a year. So between soccer, hockey, lacrosse, ultimate frisbee, I mean, all of these things that they really get into. Victory Links Golf Course right there, which is a PGA golf course as well. I mean, I think they did upwards of 35,000 rounds of golf last year alone. So just a staggering amount of people there. But again, we've really lacked the amenities to keep people in Blaine. And then selfishly, from our perspective, not only is that money leaking out of the city of Blaine, but it's leaking out of Anoka County, and it's going to Hennepin County in particular, which, you got your Bloomington Mall of America thing where it's fun to stay. There's things to do. Maple Grove, Rosedale area, all fun places to be and do if you're in town, you're a sports team. And so we really just said, we're going to take this on. Our residents deserve an entertainment district with the amenities they're looking for. And now we'll have a way to really capture all the sports tourists that are coming to our great city and potentially our great state from around the world.
So what's a couple of things on that. Number one, you seem to know the city of Blaine really well. I'm curious, do you know the store that used to be in Northtown Mall where they would sell all the cool band t-shirts and then all the bootleg CDs? Is that still there? Because that's where I used to hang out.
Yeah,
That's
that
where you
is
used
awesome.
to get the German bootleg,
Yes.
Nirvana concert or whatever that was
That is
recorded.
awesome.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's flipped over a couple times, but yeah.
All right, that's too bad. But what you touched on there was something that I think is a lot of people misunderstand, and I think that's what the role of a city is in development, and that a city, there's a lot of there are things that a city can do to make an area attractive for development, but a city can't force development, right? The market has to want development.
You
And
are
so
absolutely spot on right.
so
Absolutely.
you have to have this balance of spending public funds to attract and understanding, what the ROI is going to be, and then you get into tax increment financing and all that kind of stuff. And I think we have different experience because Crystal is fully developed, right? We didn't have any undeveloped land, and so we went through a very similar thing when I was on the council there, where we looked at the city holistically and we said, okay, here's the areas that we want to try and attract development and we want to beautify, for lack of a better term. And then we talked about, okay, so what public infrastructure spending can we do to try and entice the kind of public or private sector development in those areas? And we ended up doing some improvements to streetscapes and some things like that. But where it's appropriate, kind of public private, it's not even partnership per se, because what you're doing generally it's before the development. You're kind of prepping things to make them ready for development. And it sounds like you've got a plan there to make things, to kind of, we did the same. We had three sections, right? Our sections were much smaller, but it was like, these are the three areas we want to focus on. Here's what we want to do. What can we do from a public investment standpoint? So that was cool. You're kind of speaking my language there. Can we dig in a little bit more specifically on the sports related, because I think that's where the dust up was related to, was some kind of specific sports related development. So where are we in that stage of development? Are there committed projects? Are we it's kind of before that point, or where are we?
Sure, that's a great question. So this particular project, I'll try and give you just a little bit of background, because it's such a long process that I know you understand, Jeff. But initially when we chose this area, and frankly, the city even before I was mayor, was going into this area. It's right in the middle of our city. If you look at a map, 105th Avenue and Radisson Road is almost probably dead on the heart of our city. And as I'd mentioned earlier, as the city was growing, Blaine at one point in time was, that's up north, right? It's only 11 miles from Minneapolis, St. Paul, but, it was up north.
It
And
still feels up north for
it's
me,
so,
and
yeah,
I only live
exactly.
in Crystal, right?
Exactly right. And so as it was developing out, right there in the heart of our city now became kind of an industrial park, just right in the middle of the city now. But at the time, no one could envision, humanity living past 105th Avenue and Blaine, right? It was just
Right.
kind of like, hey, this is kind of the wall and this is the industrial park. So the city started going in and buying up some of those properties as they were, kind of pole barn manufacturing or industrial buildings. Started buying up some of those properties even before I was mayor. Um, and as I came in and said, hey, we really need to think about this entertainment district, this was the site that was selected because the city had already owned some properties. So we had sent out, kind of like you said, we had kind of master designed this area probably starting early in 2021 as a city council, sent out an RFP to select an architect. We then, as the city of Blaine has an EDA, so an economic development authority, which is it is basically the city council and the mayor. But that allows us to move in a way that a city council can't, especially around land acquisition and development. But the EDA approved that plan in June of 2022, just kind of the master design, right? Like, hey, as far as a city council goes, this is what we kind of like to see and envision. We then chose went to go through an RFP process where we started looking for a master developer to select. And that started in July of 2022. And we entered through that whole process, took about 6 months in selecting a master developer, but selected that master developer, entered into that agreement in December of 2022. So right now we are working our way through that master development agreement and doing all of the civil engineering that needs to happen, still acquiring the last couple parcels of land, but beginning to work on the master plan and the architecture of what the site layout will be. And you know this too, Jeff, from your days on the city council. It's we've got a huge environmental piece that we've got to go through. We've got all the civil engineering that has to be done, all of the horizontal stuff. We're really kind of in that horizontal phase.
Rainwater management, all of
Exactly right. And because Blaine, it's such a significant point, because Blaine really is a massive wetland in general. Our soils are not amazing. We're basically all sand and wetlands up here. We have to have about 3.5 acres of water runoff on this site, which is tremendous if you think about it. So the engineering and the architecture just to get to that phase of figuring out where buildings will actually go is quite significant. So there are discussions right now, and that really happens mostly between the master developer, but with some of those end use operators of what are the things that will really make this a thriving entertainment district? What are the things that are needed to support that? You're going to need some corporate there. You're going to need a lunchtime crowd to support the restaurants and to support the retail. You're also going to need some housing to support those things as well, kind of the Monday, through the Thursday, right? There's a whole list of ingredients that go into how you make a development successful. And so all of those things are being contemplated and evaluated right now because it has to work. It's not just, hey, what's the coolest sounding thing, but it's what will be successful day one, but then also what's successful day year 7, what's successful year 15, and what's your revitalization plan to really keep those things current and feeling new. So even when it's 10, 15 years old, it still feels new and it's thriving. So there's a lot that goes into that. And that's kind of the phase we're in right now, is looking at what are the best uses and how will the land lay out to bring this all to life. But we have an aggressive timeline to bring this up, and we think the district, we are really pushing for the district really coming alive in very early spring of 2026.
That's fairly aggressive. So I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction for a second, then I'll bring us back around again. But so let's talk a little bit about the city council in Blaine. How many members are on the city council?
There are 6 members of the city council and then the mayor, so 7 votes.
And then are you elected by wards or districts, or are they all at large?
All of our city council members are elected by ward, and they're staggered terms. So there are 2 council members for each ward, which are staggered, and the mayor is at large.
Okay. And so generally speaking, what's the makeup of the city council in terms of, I guess I'd say, tenure and experience, and is it all old timers and you're the new guy? Is it a mix? What's the kind of
we have one city council member that just won her first reelection, and she's our most senior member.
Okay, so it is a fairly young group in terms of, I mean, not age wise, but I mean in terms of tenure on the city council. Okay,
correct.
Then one of my soapbox items that I can't stop talking about is what I despise the infiltration of partisan politics to local government. You have served both in a partisan office and in local government. Any initial thoughts when I say that, when I just throw that out there?
I wholeheartedly agree with you. As you said, I've had partisan background, served 8 years in the Minnesota, was partisan. And people expect those roles to be partisan. And I think depending on what you want your brand to be and represent your people, there's right ways and wrong ways to do that. When it comes to local government, and I include county government as well, it should really be devoid of partisan politics. Roads should not be partisan. Development should not be partisan. It can be if you allow it to be. It shouldn't be. That's not how you serve a city best, right? This is your community. I understand that things are partisan at the state and national level, right? And you're fighting for political ideology, you're fighting for political platforms. The city here, you're supposed to be fighting for your neighbor. You're supposed to be fighting for your community. You're supposed to be fighting for roads and developments that work for everybody, regardless of their political ideology, their political past, whatever those things might be. So I completely agree with you. And I think that it becomes very difficult to do your job the right way if you let politics get into it at all. And so I really, really worked hard at trying to keep politics out of City Hall. It's, again, not hard to look at other cities, whether it be in the state of Minnesota or throughout the country, where they've let politics ruin their communities. And, just as a city leader, that's, in my opinion, not the time or the place.
Which do you enjoy more? Can you say now? I mean, it's like you had more time in the legislature, I guess. That's probably like asking a musician what's their favorite album. They're always going to say it's the one I just recorded, right? Yeah.
But I would say, I mean, the legislature, and Michael, I mean, I don't know your thoughts around this, but there is something just almost intoxicating about the adrenaline with which the Capitol ran on. I loved my time in St. Paul. It's not conducive to a family or a career or any of those things too long. And frankly, being kind of a citizen servant, right? It shouldn't be a lifelong career thing anyway. And so I felt for me, 8 years was good enough. I also don't think St. Paul is what it was when I left. And so I don't know that I would enjoy it now compared to what I got to experience. But being mayor, the ability to really, work with some of your immediate community members to say, how do we improve our city and help it reach its full potential, and the speed with which you can get things done compared to the legislature, is extremely rewarding. So I really enjoy being mayor, really enjoy the city of Blaine. It's just, but it's one of those things where, like, I think my 8 years in St. Paul will have always have a special place in my heart, and the relationships, kind of the trench warfare and the people you got to meet and, experience life with, was truly something I'll always cherish. But as far as being effective and being an executive in your city is pretty amazing.
I would say that legislative politics have a tendency to sometimes get more headlines, but that's certainly changed in the last week related to Blaine, and that's why we're having this conversation today. But I think a bit because
That's right.
things can all politics is local, as Tip
That's
O'Neill
right.
famously said, and
Yeah.
and hearing you two talk about municipal code and talk about you guys go bantering back and forth, this is where C-SPAN needs to develop, and this is where they need to expand, branching out into municipal conversations and stuff. You two are just, we need to do more of this. And you guys are absolutely geeking out here and nerding out, and I'm learning stuff, and that's the great part. I'm learning stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
So let me ask one more kind of set the baseline question, and then we'll get into the dust up, if you will. But what do you make as the mayor of Blaine? What's the annual salary?
What the annual salary? It's right around $15,000
Yeah. Okay.
for the year.
I think I made 8 as a city council member in Crystal. It works out to, if you're doing the job right, it works out to about 40 cents an hour.
Right.
Because it's a part-time job. And I think television, between television and movies and the big cities, it creates a impression in people's minds that are not that is unrealistic about what most municipal government is, right? It's an extremely part-time job. Do you have an office at City Hall?
I do not actually. I mean, I have rooms that I have access to, certainly, but no, I don't. There's not a mayoral office.
Right. And people get surprised to hear that. They're like, your office at City Hall. I'm like, you don't have an office. You might get an access to a conference room if you want to meet with a constituent somewhere, or whatever, but it's not, you don't have staff. Right. There's not an aide to the mayor or anything like that. There's a city manager or a city administrator that runs the whole city and then gives a little bit of their attention to the elected officials too. But it's not, if you want to write a letter, you're probably writing that letter by yourself. If you're going to, respond to some of these things, anything, I mean, it's basically, you're a one-man show, which is much different than a legislature where you had this kind of whole machine behind you to do different things.
Which is so interesting when you think about that, Jeff, because you're exactly right. It's exactly how it is. When I served, I mean, until redistricting, and actually even maybe after, I still had probably one of the larger House districts, I think, just because of Blaine's growth. But, especially towards the end there, when I was a committee chair, I had an LA, I had a CLA, a committee legislative assistant, I had a committee administrator, I had a media writer. It's like, or even when I was the House whip, like all of those. I mean, I had multiple staff underneath me, and you get here and now, so what was that district? Maybe 40 plus 50,000 for a House district. I have a city of 73,000 people, 73,000 constituents, and it's, it's so interesting. It's a larger district than, a county commissioner. Even you look at Anoka County. I mean, I think they make 80 plus grand a year, and have, I think, less meetings than we do, which is all fine. It's not why you do the job, but it is very interesting how those things come to be.
It's a strange place to be, and you have to kind of love it to do it. Otherwise, because you're certainly not doing it to get rich. Right. The other thing that I think is interesting, especially as somebody who has the partisan background, is the way that the open meeting law works in cities versus the legislature, right? Because at the legislature, you guys would caucus, you'd go into a room together, you'd decide who was going to vote on what and what we were going to say about it and do all these things. And then you'd walk out and then it would play out on the floor and, whatever. But it was largely predetermined. There are very, very, very strict laws about what who you can talk to and how many conversations you can have, and you can't have serial meetings, and you have to make sure that you didn't talk about the same thing with this person who then talked with that
That's
person.
right.
And there's an opportunity. So you have 7. We also had 7. You could talk to like 2 other people without
That's
getting in
exactly
trouble,
right.
and that's it.
Exactly right. Yep.
And so
Can you explain that for our listeners? So you describe how that would work on a daily basis. For instance, you can't have a group text. You can't
email, right?
you
So
can't,
we were not allowed to.
You could also not group text. You couldn't have like invite them all over your house for a barbecue or a meeting.
So
you would have to post it online as a city council meeting,
Right.
and then publish the address, and technically anyone could show up to your house for that meeting.
There's not an allowance for a social gathering of some sort. So you couldn't get together to watch the Vikings game last night, or something.
You could, as long as you don't talk about anything related to the city.
Got it.
And
okay.
Could you? I mean, can you? Yes. Should you? It depends on your kind of level of comfort with it. There were certainly times when I was at social gatherings when there was more than a quorum, or like a funeral. There was a funeral for somebody, right? And there was more than a quorum there because it was somebody that we worked with. But it wasn't. We weren't all sitting talking about what was on the agenda next time. It was certainly personal. But when it comes to like pushing an agenda forward, that's where I think it gets really interesting, because you have the ability in the legislature and in that partisan role to kind of coordinate with people and divide and conquer and understand where people feel. There's a lot of behind the scenes conversations, and you can get the temperature. And we were not allowed to email each other. You could email one person, you could have a phone call with one person, you could have a phone call with a second person, but you don't want to get past that, because then you've gone over the limit. And so not all of, but the vast majority of what you're talking about absolutely happens in public at either I don't know what you call them, work sessions or study sessions, or they're the meetings that aren't on TV, and then there's the meetings that are on TV, right? And so you have some
workshops or work sessions.
Yeah, and they're all public.
Correct.
It's just that some of them are where you in one set of meetings you can't take a formal action because you can't take any votes. In the council meetings, that's where you have to take all your actions, because that's when votes happen. And so there's the ability to coordinate and triangulate and do all of that stuff is extremely limited at the local level. And I think that's something that people don't understand either, because it's the extremely limiting ability to understand where other people are on something, or to try and get on the same page on something, all happens publicly.
And I think that was really one of the tougher pieces to adjust to for me, especially coming out of the legislature. And it's not because you wanted to ever hide anything or not have those conversations, but there also is something to being able to have open, honest conversations that aren't always, on TV, that I think ends up producing a better policy product. And that I think would help eliminate some of the potential political things if you were able to collaborate and build consensus on things before you had to walk into, a publicized or a TV, style council meeting.
Right.
The reason I say that is because in the House of Representatives, it was just embedded and ingrained into your DNA. You do your work in committee, right? Like if you started doing outside of the pure political junk, right? Like if you started doing amendments to fix something on the House floor, it's a really good way to get your bill sent back to committee, right? They're like, no, you do your work in committee, you bring things to the floor that are ready for prime time. And so to bring things to the floor in a council meeting that aren't ready for prime time, and that, and then if you have to add inexperienced council members on top of that, so maybe they have a good idea, but they just don't have the experience to understand the consequences of and I don't mean like negatively always, but just to understand the effect of what they're saying does not lead to the best public policy in most cases.
And then you meet twice a month, right?
Right.
So if you want to have further conversation on something, you have to balance the fact that, okay, if we're going to talk about this more, that's great. but now we're looking at 2 months out because of, if it's an ordinance or whatever, you have notice and all this stuff. And so it's like, so a lot of that. So it is an interesting,
It is
um,
interesting.
it's interesting to navigate. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the dust up. There was some media coverage about this project that you have going on in Blaine. I want to start and preface by the number. I'm going to give a short list of the number of things that I was personally accused of that was either a conflict of interest or corrupt. Okay, when I was on the city council.
Yeah.
Any member of the city council or the mayor owning a business or having any customers that live in the city was a conflict of interest or corruption. Voting to sell land that the city owned in another city was a conflict of interest and corruption. Using a vendor that gives you good rates to get your campaign literature printed was corruption or a conflict of interest. I could just keep going.
Are you a city council member in Hazard County or something?
The number of times, it's really interesting because people tend to they throw this term around, conflict of interest, or they talk about corruption, and they do it in such a cavalier way as if those words don't have meaning and if those words don't have definition. And I was literally, and in one of the media stories about this particular topic we're talking about, one of the people who was mad at you about something literally made the statement, which was my first example, that the mayor cannot have a business or customers in the city because that's inherently a conflict of interest, which is just a ludicrous position that doesn't even deserve discussion, right? That's just
Right.
that's such an asinine choice. Can you tell us a little bit, to the best of your ability, because I know it's sometimes hard to get into the mind of the person who wants to accuse you of something wildly that doesn't have any basis in reality, but can you give us kind of, at least in broad strokes, what's the potential rub here, or what's the conflict? What are we mad about?
Man, that, like you said, that is so tough to try and crawl inside of the minds of individuals that don't like you or don't agree with something without them being clear and concise and honest about it. So I'll try. I'm not really sure. A little background is I do have several business partners, and we have moved into kind of the hospitality space and looking at, well, for sure, we are putting in a restaurant, an entertainment restaurant experience in the city of Blaine, but also looking at other communities as well for expansion. But it is something where our business group, it is something that we have always said, hey, we want to provide value to people's lives. And having a great restaurant entertainment experience is a really good way to do that. We believe that we can deliver an amazing experience for people and enrich people's lives. And we think that, it's worth investing in. The city of Blaine, for me, I'm running around and selling the city of Blaine all day long. And, we meet with executive chefs or end use operators that were saying, hey, come and invest millions in the city of Blaine and put something here. I started asking, why are we not getting some of these unique restaurants? Why are we not getting some of these unique things that are in other communities that are staples in those communities, but we're not getting them here? And I just kind of settled on the answer is, they were initially homegrown, and it takes someone willing to step up and do it. Now, we do have, one or two individuals in the city of Blaine that have done that. And I think what they've done is inspiring, and kind of shows a roadmap. But I'm betting on the city of Blaine and betting on the almost 7 million sports visitors that come to the city of Blaine for sports and recreation, and we need more restaurants. It's a great business decision, but it's also a place where I've lived. My kids have been born and raised in, and I want to benefit my city. I think that we can provide value there. So yeah, we have started a hospitality, a restaurant business, in the city of Blaine. And so, I did not, in my mind, never once in my would be controversial, especially when, if anyone knew what it takes to open a restaurant and the millions of dollars that it takes to open a successful restaurant. I just never in my mind did I think that would be controversial. So,
As
but here we are.
as someone who's never been elected to public office, I have to say, as a taxpayer, though, as someone who that would seem to be absolutely what you would want from an elected official. You would want someone, wouldn't you want your elected officials to be out there touting the success of the city, have a business there? That's exactly what you'd want. You'd want all the you want everyone to be engaging in economic development in the city, but particularly those types of opportunities. It seems to go hand in hand. It seems to complement each other, not as a conflict of interest. It's just, I still haven't been able to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you on that. I again, never
Can I
once in my
also just
mind did it raise any flags to me that it would be controversial in any way to anyone. I mean, similarly, we want to bet on our community, invest in it. Again, we are putting millions of dollars into creating a restaurant entertainment experience that provides value. And at the end of the day, the market really is the final arbiter on whether or not you do that and do that well or not. But again, if you believe in your community, I would almost think it would be more controversial to do that outside of your community. Was your
That's
community
exactly what I was
not
going to
worth
ask.
investing in?
That's what I was going to ask. In the inverse, I was going to say, how would it look if you were the mayor of a city, mayor or a city council member of a city, and you had a business and you had an opportunity to develop in your city and you choose not to?
Michael, I think that the answer is, again, that not that you haven't had to deal with your share of people who didn't like you in your life, but it doesn't matter because it was both corruption and a conflict of interest to own property in the city of Crystal and then also in a different city. Because why do you have rental properties that are in a different community? And then somehow it extends to somehow that community is also providing you with some sort of corruption and kickbacks or whatever it is, and it's never substantiated, right? It's always some kind of random, whatever. It's this vague, whatever. Let me let me ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
Tim Sanders, did the city of Blaine give you any special tax breaks for your restaurant?
Zero.
Okay.
No, I mean, nor did we pursue anything financial from the city at all.
Were you given any special treatment whatsoever about anything related to this particular project?
No, not at all. We followed the full process.
Did the project go? So it's some kind of, and I don't know all the details. I apologize, but I know. So it's a restaurant. So you're thinking about opening a restaurant. You went to. Did it go through the planning commission? Is that where it went originally? Or did it not have to go through the planning commission?
It did not have to go through the planning commission because we are more than 500 feet away from a residential home,
and
right? So which triggers your public hearings then are in front of the full city council instead of the planning commission.
So there are only certain things. Not everything goes through the planning commission, and there's a whole staff that deals with that, right? And they know all of the regulations and what goes where and whatever. And then, did you take the League of Minnesota Cities training for like new hire people? Did you go through that little thing when you were first elected?
Yeah, it was virtual for me back in 2020.
Because one of the things, I mean, they talk about, one of the things they dive deep in, and I'm sure that you've had conversations with your city attorney, but we talk about conflict of interest. We talk about various things. We talk about, we talk about all of these, and how to not get yourself in a jam and who to loop in and all of those things. And the ability for someone to secretly push a project through is just not I mean, it just doesn't exist. I mean, the number of people, there are so many public hearings, there's public notice that everything's published. There's just, so that's why these notions of corruption always, or these notions of special treatment always they lacked they didn't make sense to me, right? Because it just doesn't, you're just kind of going, I wouldn't even know how to do that if I tried, right? I mean, it would, you'd have to be like comically bad at some of this stuff. The one thing that I thought was really interesting. So, I had a particular council member that didn't like me.
Shocker.
Nothing I could do. Nothing
Right.
I could do would make
Sure.
them like me. They just didn't like me, and therefore
Yeah.
everything I voted for, they voted against, and it was just all this
Sure.
silly stuff.
Yep.
What I found really, really interesting though is that this restaurant that you had that you have came up for a vote to move the patio or get an outdoor patio approval, something like that, right?
Yes, it was moving the patio from the rear of the building to kind of the front and the side. So it
Which
was actually
was
a conditional use permit
okay,
amendment. We already had a CUP.
right? So we're getting like way deep into the nerd weeds here, but cities, there are certain things that you are allowed to do in the city code, and then there are certain things that if you want to do them, you can do them, but you have to get approval, and that's what a conditional use permit is. And sometimes they come with conditions, and so it's like a frequent one for like an outdoor patio would be they would put a condition on it so that if you had repeated noise complaints, that then you couldn't continue to use the patio or something like that. I mean, those are the kind of things that a city would do is they'd say, this is a use we want to look a little bit more at and decide, do we want to put some conditions on them or not?
Right. And in simple terms, those are things that are permitted uses, but which they're going to place conditions on. So it's actually really kind of restrictions on permitted uses.
Yes.
And to your point, it's, whether it be attached to the CUP or the liquor license, like, hey, if you have a patio, you're going to have liquor out there, it needs to be fenced or kind of barricaded off from, people can't just be able to walk in or walk off the patio. There's noise decibel levels, right? I mean, it's all of those things to where you're saying, this is how you be a good neighbor functioning in your permitted use, kind of in your area. Yeah.
And you recused yourself on any votes related to the restaurant, yes? On your own restaurant, yes?
Correct. We had an original public hearing in front of the city council in March for the original conditional use permit. Our liquor license came through and had a public hearing in May of this year. And then most recently at the last council meeting was a CUP amendment, all three of which I recused myself, left the dais.
Did you?
Well.
I was going to ask if you left the dais. Sometimes people do, and sometimes they don't. And I don't have a strong opinion on.
We've established you don't even have an office, so where you just wander the halls because there's not even a secret room for you to go to, and there's no smoke room you can go to. Did you just wander the halls?
That's a great question. I actually did walk back off of the council. There is kind of a sitting room, and so I literally was sitting in this room by myself.
Right.
And sitting there waiting, and I'm like thinking this really, like, I understood that there was, just from some of the emails that have been flying around, I understood that there was some, but I thought it would be 10 minutes, and I had no idea it would go as long as it did, which I don't know how long it was, an hour and a half, but I'm just sitting there going, what in the world is going on?
It's a lot of time to have to sit in a little room by yourself.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So I am going to nerd out a little bit more. One of the things that you talk about when you are doing anything related to zoning or planning, issuing a conditional use permit or issuing a variance, you are functioning in what they call a quasi-judicial function,
yes.
right?
Yep.
And what that means is you're not a judge, but you are supposed to approach it as if you are a judge, which means you don't prejudge the project. You take all of the facts in, and then you vote based on the facts, and you vote narrowly on the law, right? And the law is very specific about why you can or cannot approve a project. And we were always, it's not required, but we were always taught to cite the particular law. If you were voting against a project, you had to cite the reason why and make sure that it was a legal reason.
It's literally called a finding. You have to have a finding to vote against a CUP or a variance.
So what
you have to have a specific reason. You have to have a.
You can't
thumb down.
You don't like it because you don't like the person who owns it, or you don't like their attitude, or whatever it is. Right? There's a lot of reasons, and there are actually a lot of things that you need to be careful of what you say, because if you decline something, and the person who is applying can point to the fact that you were not acting properly in that judicial role, that you had prejudged the project, or that you were using inappropriate reasons, you could get in legal trouble. You could get in legal trouble personally, and the city could get into trouble. So what kills me about this whole process is that the only shining example of, I'm not going to go so far as to call it corruption, but I'm going to say inappropriate behavior, is that the person who was accusing you of all this stuff wildly voted against your conditional use permit because they don't like you, right? Not because they had a concern with the patio moving from one place to another, right? Noise decibels were not cited as the reason. It was just, well, I don't like the mayor, and I'm going to make a political point, and so I'm going to vote it down. And that is what kills me, is that when I looked at the whole situation, and it just rang so true to my personal experience, because there were, and in my case, again, very hyper-partisan people who are serving in a nonpartisan role, who put politics above anything else and just couldn't get along with anybody else, and just had to, make these huge, I don't know, it's like I don't understand the behavior, but I don't like it, and I wish it didn't happen. But it's very common.
And very similar to your point too, right? I mean, another thing too is cities do have precedent. And so you have to treat instances and applicants really pretty much the same across the board. And, just ironically, late this summer, I think it was, or sometime this summer, we had another restaurant, which is actually ironically owned by a sitting state senator right now, who I like and love his business and love everything about. Again, just as a Blaine resident, love that he invested so much into bringing something new to the city of Blaine. They had a conditional use permit amendment for exactly the same thing, moving their patio, expanding their patio, and adding live music. The only difference was they actually have residential townhomes that are maybe a couple hundred feet from their patio, whereas ours is like 12 or 1,500 feet, literally across Highway 65. Like nowhere even close, right?
That's not close.
Not even close. So it's funny because that passed unanimously and without any comment whatsoever. And so again, you've got a situation where you're not treating applicants the same with almost the exact same ingredients. Sitting elected official, conditional use permit on moving a patio and adding live music. And so again, like you said, it is very concerning, that is what causes dysfunction and distrust in city government. It's not that there's a conflict of interest. And let's think about this just for a moment. Minnesota statute, even the League of Minnesota Cities, contemplates that there will be legitimate times where there will be a conflict of interest. And so there is steps put in place for you to take in order to not have undue influence or receive undue benefit in those instances, which is to recuse yourself, remove yourself from the dais, to abstain from voting on it or talking on it, all of which things that I have done. But if you were to never be allowed to be in a situation where there could be a conflict, the law would state that. But it provides remedies when a conflict arises. And I think that is something too the public needs to understand, or people have instances that there are appropriate ways to handle things where there's a conflict. And the conflict here is just, I shouldn't be voting on my own project, but there's nothing the city was doing for our restaurant that it wouldn't do for any other restaurant, or that it didn't just do for another applicant, which is to say, yes, you can have a patio and have live music.
Yeah, and I think people lose, again, I can't get in the head of people who go down these wild accusations, but if you think about a township, or think about these small towns where there's a few hundred residents, right? And there's a few people, and everybody owns property in town, and they're the only business owners in town, and all these things. It's not like this is an unprecedented situation. And as you said, there's procedures for it. From everything I can tell, the procedures were followed. And the whole issue to me, again, the reason why this came about is I read that and I just immediately, it was like I was back in the council chambers hearing all about how horrible I was because of X, Y, and Z this week. And it was just like, okay, what is it this time? What did we do? What did we do this time? And I hate that part of municipal politics. I have to be 100% honest. One thing we did when I was on the council is we had a park, and the park had a road going right through the middle of it, always has. And we said, we're going to take the road out of the middle of the park and we're going to just put grass there and we're going to connect the two sides of the park. But the way that I was treated by the residents in that neighborhood for daring to think that we should not have a busy road in the middle of where the ball field is, about the accusations and all of that, it was one of the reasons when I just went, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, not for $8,000 a year, because I don't want to sit here and listen to these accusations of corruption when what I'm trying to do is take this park and just make it one park instead of two parks with a big road in the middle.
Yeah.
I just don't want kids to get hit by a car, and
exactly.
you're just gone, okay, and so it's unfortunate. I know we're probably over time at this point because I just love to talk and I could geek out on this municipal stuff all day. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we go, Tim Sanders, or anything else? One final plug for how great Blaine is. The place where I get I have a pool in my backyard, and our pool store is in Blaine, and so I have to go up there all the time to get pool chemicals. So I'm there a lot.
Right on.
There's now a great steak right down the street from there. So I plan my trips around lunch so that I can go get my great steak and then get my chlorine and microfloc clarifier or whatever it is right there.
Yeah, so, another little amenity hub spot that we're able to get.
Mayor Sanders, we appreciate you joining us today. Where can people follow you, get more information about the great city of Blaine?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. Certainly follow the City of Blaine official on all of your social media platforms. I am Tim Sanders MN on X. I don't do a ton of social media just because it is oftentimes a cesspool and we don't get accurate information out there. Shocking.
Boy, I hear that.
But I do. I mean, the City of Blaine does put out great information. The City of Blaine's website is really, really positive. Has a lot of great information on it as well. But we've got a lot going for us in Blaine. We are developing strategically and comprehensively. Highway 65 just received all of its funding to have that redone, and that is going to transform our city in the North Metro. But we have a fantastic community. I love serving it, and I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Great. We hope we can have you on again. And it's a great opportunity for Jeff and also Becky at some point to just really geek out about municipal.
Yeah, let's dig into more CUPs.
There's just been a twinkle. There's just been a twinkle in his eye today. That's just quite remarkable. So it's great that you're able to. Great to spend some time with you. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Well, hey, anytime I can provide some value, I'd love to come back.
Sounds great.
All
right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Jeff, this would be the point in the post interview that I would say to either Becky or you and your guest hosting that we just interviewed and what's your take on it? Since you did a lot of the interview, I think you should throw it back to me.
All right, that works for me. So, Michael, we just finished our interview with Mayor Tim Sanders of the city of Blaine. Any final thoughts on that?
A couple things. You two are nerds. You two are big municipal nerds. And I will say a couple of things. Becky and I, and you've contributed onto many episodes, we just did the 1-year anniversary episode of The Breakdown, and we noted that we had discussed local issues. And what I meant by local issues was mostly state legislative issues, discussed some national issues, and we've also dipped into international. We have now dipped our toe very far into municipal issues, and it was great to do.
It doesn't get any more in depth than conditional use permits and zoning ordinances, but yeah.
And for our listeners who don't have this opportunity, we record on Riverside so we can see each other. We're not recording in studio right now, but Jeff and I are recording remotely. Becky is getting ready for her fancy wedding this week. And there was an absolute twinkle in Jeff's eye during that entire interview. He just lit up a kid on Christmas morning seeing that present under the tree. This could not have been a subject matter that just warmed his heart more than talking about municipal code. It's like when we interviewed Secretary of State Steve Simon, and Becky had the opportunity to talk about election law and election results and election reform. Those two geeked out in the room. And so seeing you and Mayor Sanders remotely there was a mutual love for municipal code and the nuances of city government. And for me, it was just delightful to see. It was just
Well,
heartwarming.
I'm
Just
glad I
heartwarming.
could. I'm glad I could provide that opportunity for you.
It was like that. It was just remarkable. It's like two chess masters just going head to head.
Well, fantastic. So I wanted a couple of final thoughts here. It's unfortunate, but I have a lot of experience with unhinged elected officials. I unfortunately dealt with it a lot. I had unhinged current elected officials and then unhinged former elected officials that just had this kind of obsession with whatever it was I was doing, or in many cases not doing, but they had imagined that I was doing. I think the council in Blaine and the mayor in Blaine are in for a rough couple of years. It sucks. The behavior generally doesn't stop. I'm of two minds on this subject. We didn't name the council member who was making the wild accusations, and that was intentional on my part. In that, I don't know that it's best to feed that type of behavior and reward it when what they're looking for is headlines. But at the same time, if you don't name names, have you not held that person accountable? It's tough for me. I feel bad for them because I know how disruptive it is to have somebody on a board or on a council and a commission that just has no interest in being productive. And there's a difference, of course, between no one's asking everyone to agree, right?
Correct.
It's actually much better when people disagree and you have good spirited debates and you get better solutions that way. So nobody's saying everyone needs to vote the same way. What you do need is you need people who are all working toward the same goal, which is effective governance. And some people just like to disrupt things, and they can't get past personal motivations, political motivations. It's awful. And so I feel bad that they're going to have to deal with this for the next few years because there's not really much you can do about a bad elected official. You can vote them out next time, but the threshold is necessarily high for removing someone. I don't know that this person has met the threshold for removal anyway. Even if we had an easier time to recall somebody, I don't know that this behavior has met that high standard anyway. One thing I did want to loop back on is, I mentioned during the conversation about acting in that quasi-judicial function, which is just a fun word to say, quasi-judicial.
It's fun to listen to.
So, that there are things that you can say and there are things that you can't say, and you need to be careful about what you say. And it's not that it's not restrictive on speech, but it's that you're supposed to be judging things on its merits, and you're supposed to have facts, and you're supposed to be acting, like a judge would. You're supposed to be judging the facts in front of you. And if you stray from that, you're going to get yourself into trouble. What's interesting to me is that the council member in question here in Blaine has already crossed that line once, receiving a letter from the attorney of a developer for some statements that was made at a work session suggesting that they were involved in some unfair labor practices. Generated when you're a developer that works with a city, you're not interested in getting your lawyers involved any more than you need to, right? Lawyers are expensive. A lot of work is done based on relationships. It's better to have a good relationship with people than a contentious relationship. So when a developer, in this case, the developer is, and let me look it up here so that I don't get it wrong, Enclave Companies. So a developer named Enclave Companies had their attorneys, Larkin Hoffman, send a letter to the city of Blaine earlier this year, July 2023, discussing that the comments that were made by this council person were essentially defamatory. I mean, they were. Let me see here. The allegations are defamatory and factually unsupported, and that the company will respond aggressively to any further attempt to impugn its reputation with allegations of labor improprieties. So that's a pretty big step when a developer who's trying to get work done in the city has their attorney send a letter saying, yeah, well, you're going to force us to sue the city council if you guys don't stop making up things, unsubstantiated claims about us. So I think the people, the city council in Blaine, the mayor of Blaine, the city staff in Blaine, who takes up the brunt of a lot of this dysfunction when there's dysfunction on the elected body, and then ultimately the residents of Blaine are going to have a rough couple of years as this person continues to try and build their personal brand on, kind of just causing trouble and not doing anything useful for the community.
Who suffers? Well, first of all, let me ask two follow-up questions, if I may. How common, in your experience, are letters like that when they're sent to city councils? Is that a common occurrence?
No, it's very rare. When you have, again, you're trying to get a project done in the city. You need to work with the city staff. You need to work with the elected officials. You need to be a good partner all around. There's a lot of things that are going to come up during a development. It's like dealing with the building inspector, right? You treat them with respect. There's some give and take. There's gray areas in any type of regulation, right? And so you can have somebody who's going to go 100% by the book and make your life very, very difficult, or you can have somebody who is understanding what the reality of the situation is and saying, okay, that may be a couple inches off of where it should be, but it's structurally sound. It's going to be good. We're fine. You have reasonable people. You don't want people to be unreasonable. And there's never been a situation where somebody gets their lawyer involved and it calms things down. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? It just that's a step that turns up the heat. And so the decision by a developer to send a letter like this to the city was, I'm sure, not taken lightly. They felt that it was important enough to mention that they're not going to allow somebody to go impugn their character and accuse them of things without proof. You can't just go accuse people of things. And so not common, because most people know how to behave themselves better than that.
I'm going to preface my question with a general statement that I have long held this position, which is Jeff has served in the past on the Crystal City Council. Jeff is one of the, if he's not one of the smartest, if he's not the smartest, he's one of the smartest people that I know in terms of local elections, functionings of city government. He is a tremendous resource. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've relied on him to answer or explain an issue related to anything at local government. Jeff's knowledge is vast, and it extends well beyond city code, but he is a subject matter expert. And the reason why he's here today is because he's a subject matter expert to comment on this. And multiple times throughout the course of our history of our podcast, we relied on Jeff, not for his food takes or any of his other opinions, but certainly about municipal matters related to municipal business and doings. And so my question to you, based on your experience, is who gets hurt the most by this type of behavior? My uninformed opinion, but I'll ask the expert here, is that the citizens do it. It impacts, it complicates city business. It makes it difficult for development. It breaks up the dynamics and the working relationships of the council when you have someone approaching it in this way, where they want to assign virtue to what they're doing and vice to everyone else. It really poisons the well. And so in your experience, what is Blaine looking at if this situation doesn't get corrected?
There is, I mean, everyone suffers, right? And I don't know who suffers the most. The people who, I hate to get all libertarian soapbox on you, but we don't have a democracy. We have a representative republic, right? The whole point being you elect somebody to represent you, and they're supposed to go and be your advocate in the elected body. So the people in Blaine who elected this person do not have a functional representative at this point, because they have someone who can't work with other people. They have someone who makes wild accusations that are unfounded. They have someone who is not going to get any sort of agenda through and is largely going to be ignored. Legislative bodies are all about the majorities. I used to tell people all the time, they needed to be able to count to 4. We had 7 people on our council. You need to know how to count to 4. How are you going to get 3 other people to agree with your position? That's through a number of things: persuasion, explanation, enticement, different ways of explaining things to people. Accusing people of corruption with no basis in fact is never a way to get people on your side. And so the people who elected this person to the council do not have an effective representative. There are 6 other people on that council, and they can do absolutely anything they want to do without that person's input. And so those people are now left without a functional representative because that person is incapable of working with others. And again, nobody is saying that person should agree with everybody on everything. Or if they have a real bona fide case of corruption, they should absolutely bring it forward. But you actually have to have something more than, I don't like this person, or I'm a Democrat and they used to be a Republican, right? I mean, and I don't want to make this a particularly partisan thing, but in both cases, in the city of Crystal and in the city of Blaine, the people who couldn't get along and couldn't behave themselves were the most partisan, flag waving Democrats that there could be. And they were all about that. They were part of the DFL, and they were the DFL representative. I'm the only Democrat on this council, and I'm the only, and that in and of itself, and it doesn't have to be a Democrat. If it was a Republican, it could be the same exact thing, right? We've had county boards that were similar, that had a lone Republican that also couldn't get along and couldn't get their agenda moved forward. But it's people who really embrace that partisanship in a place where everyone else is trying not to play politics and just trying to get along. That's a problem. So I feel bad. I always feel bad for the city staff. The city staff are professionals. They have to work with these people. The staff doesn't have the luxury of saying, yeah, I'm just not going to take your calls anymore. I'm not going to respond to your emails. I'm just not going to deal with you, because that person is an elected official and has to be dealt with on par with the same that other elected officials are. That said, staff is human as well as, just as much as anybody else is. So, are they going to be a little bit slower in responding to certain inquiries? Are they going to not put their full faith or their full effort into something that they know is just going to get used against them later? You don't want to be that person that everyone's walking on eggshells around. I was able to, I'm not trying to toot my own horn per se, but that I was able to affect a lot of change and change minds and get things done a different way. But at the end of the day, people still, I guess for the most part, I've never had anyone say that they refused to talk to me after I left, right? I have a good relationship with a lot of the staff that was there when I was there. I can still call them and ask them things. And that doesn't mean that we didn't have contentious conversations about things, where they were advocating their opinion and I was advocating my opinion. But there's a way to do that where you just aren't a psycho. You aren't a jerk. You aren't, just make yourself just someone that nobody can deal with. And so the other council members are going to be in for a tough time. The staff's going to be in a tough time, and the citizens are left without a representative. So that's too bad for them. I hope they do a better job selecting and vetting their representative next time.
I want to point out to our listeners that, once again, that this episode was generated by tweets sent out by Jeff Kolb. You can follow him on X or Twitter at JP Kolb to get the backstory on this. And it was a great discussion, and we're going to follow this more and talk about it more. Jeff, I do wanted to this is a last minute addition to our script and our schedule for the day. We can cut this if we need to, but I wanted to let our listeners know about the Christmas lights outside your house.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
I wanted just to note, and I have found this so interesting. Jeff has the online persona of being the absolute Scrooge. Get off my lawn, Scrooge. But he has got a big heart. He is a big softy. And one of the best ways to talk about him being a big softy is to talk about his light show. Take it away.
So we have one of those crazy people light shows outside our house where the Christmas lights are in sync to music. So you pull up in front of the house and tune your FM radio to 88.1 and you'll hear some Christmas Carol classics and see some flashing lights, and it's a fun time. A couple of years ago, my kids, one of the things we like to do, drive around and look at Christmas lights. My kids were talking about the Christmas lights. They asked, could we have a big, can we put up a bunch of Christmas lights next year? And I guess as dads are want to do sometimes, I took it a little bit overboard and I'll put it out there, but I'll put a plug for the show. So as you know, I live in Crystal, crystallightshow.com, crystallightshow.com has all the details, the hours, when you can come and see us, where we're located, all that kind of stuff. I love having people come out. If you know me, send a text or send a message on X or whatever it is that you want to do. I'll come out and say hello, or don't. You don't have to say hello if you don't want to, but it's a good time. I love it. It's fun. So
Another nice
for letting me have the plug. That was nice.
I always want to do that. And the nice thing is, if you park your car and walk up to the front door, Jeff is always serving milk and cookies. So feel free to do that too. Just knock on the door, milk and cookies served. I'm just joking. It's a great show. I've driven by multiple times. Haven't been there this year, but I'll be over there in the coming days. And it's a great show. And it also is it's a best example of how the voice you hear, the person online, is not really who they are. And the Crystal Light Show, I hope everyone enjoys it. And I wanted to make sure we gave a plug to Jeff and his great work and his family's great work for bringing a little light and sunshine and happiness into these cold winter months. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us again.
As long as we're doing plugs, let me do one last minute. I would be remiss. I'm a big fan of pinball. We were talking about Blaine, and I never mentioned Blaine Brook, but Blaine Brook Bowl up in Blaine has a great collection of pinball machines. So if you're looking for something to do up in Blaine, keep the pinball alive, because I need them to stay open so I can go and play pinball when I get the urge.
You want to plug your dentist or your doctor's office or your, where you get your pockets?
No, I'm good.
Oh, no, we're going to talk. Oh, I just said that. One last thing I want to say about Jeff.
We don't need to talk about this.
One last thing I'm going to say about Jeff. Jeff.
We do not need to talk about this.
Okay, I won't say it then. I won't say it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You can. I think people should know that it's an option.
Just came to me, and we can absolutely edit this, but we'll decide off air. Jeff expands the size of his pockets in his pants. Jeff, it sounds dirty what I'm saying, but can you just explain it to people? Because
okay,
I do have family members. I do have family members that listen, and they're going to think I'm being. No, you literally expand the size of your pocket.
Like every other person, like every other man around, right? I have a phone, and I have this big stupid phone, and you need to put it in your pocket. And for whatever reason, the jeans that they make these days have these stupid tiny little pockets. You put your phone in your pocket, and it just sticks out the top, or that's just not comfortable. I don't carry a purse. Okay, so I have a wallet, I have car keys, and I have a phone, and sometimes my AirPods that I have to carry around in my front pockets. And the tiny little pockets on the jeans that I buy are not good. So I went to a tailor and I said, "Can you just make these pockets longer? Is that possible?" And they said, "Sure." And there you go. And so if I buy jeans that have pockets that are not long enough, I'll take them to the tailor. They're located right here in Crystal. And
you better say their name.
I actually have no idea. They're in the mall that's up by Target. I have no idea what the name of the shop is. It's just the tailor up by Target. And
can I ask?
They expand the pockets.
So you brought the jeans in and you said, "Hey, can you expand the pockets?"
Yeah.
Have they gotten that assignment before? Had someone come in with that request?
They did not act like it was the dumbest thing they've ever heard. So, I mean, it was not, I didn't know, I literally didn't know if that was a thing that people did, or like that it was I've never heard of anyone else doing it. But so I just walked in and I said, "Is that a thing you could do? Do you think you could do that?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure. No problem."
And this is a problem on one set of jeans you buy, or all your jeans?
It depends on the jeans. So like the ones I have now, the stock, the ones I'm wearing at the moment, the stock pockets were fine. They fit the phone and they fit the wallet. But I have bought pairs of jeans in the past and now I tend to look for it when I buy jeans. I try to. I don't know how people carry. You have one of those phones that's like 14 inches wide or whatever. I don't know how you carry that around in standard pockets. How do you do that?
Well, I've never had to have
Oh,
my.
You're a belt clip guy, aren't you? You're the
No, I'm
kind of guy
not.
who's got.
I've
Oh
never
yeah,
had.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
never
yeah.
had
You
my
put it on the
pockets.
belt clip
I've
and you
never had
walk
to have my
around.
pockets enlarged. I Let me see. I wore a set of jeans recently, and I didn't have any issues with the phone.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're buying jeans that have good pockets. That doesn't always happen for me.
Jeff, I own one pair of jeans.
Yeah, I don't I don't understand that behavior, but okay.
Yeah, I'm just not. It's not my. It's not a good look for me.
Well, all
Well,
right.
I just wanted to. Is there anyone else we want to plug in your life? Any
No,
other
but
business? Anything
no,
you come across?
but I think it's funny that you're going to say that jeans are not a good look for you, but you walk around in those Zubas all day. Okay. All right.
What are you talking about?
Your Zubas, you're wearing them right now.
I don't have Zubas on.
Michael, I can see the video. You've got the classic black and white striped Zubas. It's fine. You don't have to be embarrassed. They're coming back. They're making a comeback.
I don't have. What makes you think I have Zubas on?
I can see them on the camera.
You can't see him on the camera. Do you want to know what's funny? Do you want to
All
know
right.
what's funny about that
Yeah.
joke?
Yeah, go for it. Unfucking believable.
Tell the listeners.
He's wearing black and white Zubas.
I'm not wearing black and white Zubas. This is a color camera. I always wear Vikings attire. The day after the Vikings game last night, even though they lost, and there was an area. Let me just start over. There's an area dad, one of my daughter's softball team, who had a pair of Zubas, and they were Viking Zubas, and they're not Vikings pants Zubas. They're shorts, and I'm like, those are really cool. And looking for some additional Viking attire. I've never wear them out of the house. They're just my kind of casual Viking attire. And so when you were telling that story, I'm like, does he know that I'm wearing Zubas right now? Because I have Zuba shorts on. They're Viking Zuba shorts. And so I'm watching
Is
it
that what you got going on? Okay.
because
Yeah.
I don't think you saw me. I
No,
don't know
I
how
didn't.
you.
I didn't. That was totally a guess. So I guessed right.
But how did you
I-
guess that? You've
'Cause
never
you're just
seen
a-
them.
You're just a Zubas kind of guy. That's all I could say.
I've never owned a pair of Zubas until this. I just got these in the last year, and you've never seen me wear them. I've never worn them out of the house. You don't know that I have them. And
But
you know who I am. You wouldn't think that I would own Zubas. That's the whole knock. That's the whole thing around the house here is people are like,
I don't.
they can't believe that I would wear Zubas. Not that to say there's anything wrong with wearing Zubas.
I think you are so I have to disagree with your family. I think you are a Zubas guy, and it doesn't surprise me at all.
Are you telling? So you're telling me that you said that without knowing the fact that I was wearing Zubas?
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's great work. I'm glad we
Yeah.
have this recorded.
Fantastic.
My family's really going to love this episode because they do think that the fact that I own Zubas, this one pair of Zubas, and it's Viking, it should get out more because it's not, people wouldn't think that I would do that, but I do it. It's not like I have a tattoo or something. It's just a pair of Zubas, but it's just not my thing. I'm not a big jean wearer, but it's interesting that you went right to Zubas, and I'm glad that we pressed record on this. I'm glad we kept doing this. This is great.
This is the content people tune in for. I know it.
Well, Jeff, thank you again for all that you did in this week in helping out. And we're going to continue to have you on. And great content, great stuff. And we look forward to having you back on again.
All right. Thanks for having me.
We want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can leave a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you again for listening.